Good morning, I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Asian Aviation Magazine and AsianAviation.com. Welcome to the latest in Conversation, sponsored by Metrojet of Hong Kong. Today we're speaking with Aaron Hornlimann. He's the CEO of Elenium, tech company based in Australia. Aaron, welcome to In Conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
Very quickly, let's do a quick recap of Elenium. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. As I said, you're a tech company, you're based in Australia. You've got a lot of airport clients in addition to others that I saw. Give us a quick tour of what you do and who your customers are in the aviation industry.
So the best way to kind of explain Elenium is, we were founded to try and make the passenger experience as seamless as possible from the moment they check in from home all the way to the boarding gate. Really, if you kind of distill that, it's self-service and digital identity, and that's what we focus on. And during COVID, we expanded beyond the airport and actually deployed that capability, particularly that digital identity capability, into other use cases. I think one thing that's quite interesting when you think about airports, they're effectively a microcosm for the rest of the world. I mean, you've got large organizations like airlines, government stakeholders, retail, car parking. In Changi, you've even got a waterfall, so it really is a mini city. And so our experience in airports have also given us the ability to leverage that skill and put it into other use cases from everywhere, from aged care centers to cinemas, all the way through to even military bases.
I've been talking to a lot of people in the industry for the last couple of years, and especially I think COVID-19 probably accelerated some of the investments in technology. Airports, airlines were already headed in that direction, and as we all learned, you can do a lot with technology, like what we're doing here. You're in Australia, I'm in Cambodia, and again, COVID seems to have accelerated these investments. The problems that we see now, I mean, you pick up you go online, you look at any newspaper website, Bloomberg, Reuters, Wall Street Journal, The Australian, whatever, and we're seeing headlines from all over the world in the U.S. I saw just the other day, over the weekend, almost 1,000 flights were canceled. More than, I can't remember the number, it was 3,000 or 4,000 flights were delayed. The problems, and you're a tech company, so I know it's kind of like a carpenter, everything looks like a nail. You're a tech company, you can solve everything with technology, but the travel problems that we're seeing now, it's not really a tech problem, it's more of a people problem. Would you agree?
I think it's multifaceted. Clearly, during the pandemic, and probably rightfully, a lot of airlines in particular, as well as airports, lowered their headcount to deal with the costs, to effectively go into recovery mode. And I think the recovery has happened a little bit faster than everyone expected, right? Everyone wanted to get back on a plane and started traveling again. And so now that the industry has been concertinaed. I don't think technology can solve all of it. If you think about some of the basics, even putting baggage onto, in the belly of an aircraft really is quite difficult to do with technology. But technology can help. I think it can help alleviate the requirement for personnel at the check-in area and at the security area, and hopefully that could mean those resources could be reallocated to I guess, buttress areas that technology doesn't help. So technology is part of the solution. It's definitely not all of it. And I think that some of the problems we're seeing manifest at the moment are going to be around for a little while. I don't think it just fixes itself in the next few months. A lot of the people that were in the aviation industry have left and gone into other industries. And so we're going to have to collectively think about how we entice people to come back.
The trend we're seeing, I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. The basic nature of airports, they're actually built to process as many people as possible. They're not really geared for social distancing, those kinds of things. And airports have been hit hard. Airlines, of course, have been hit hard. Some governments have stepped in with funding, whether it's loans or whether it's outright grants or whatever. We've been seeing the technology, biometrics, QR codes, digital identities. A couple of things. One, does the aviation industry, whether it's airports or airlines, with all the money that they've lost, do they have the money to spend on new technology, new investments? And also, do you see airports changing the basic nature of the way they work? Again, they're built to process as many passengers as possible. Although, if you've ever flown into Atlanta or someplace like that, I don't think they get it very right. Can you touch on those two subjects?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of who's going to ultimately pay for it, I think it's really a case of everyone has to dig into their pocket, right? So, I think airlines are going to have to invest to be able to entice passengers to come back, but also to be able to handle the processes you talk about. Airports are going to have to invest as well. I don't think passengers are necessarily going to escape the fact that there are going to be prices going up in some circumstances, and not just because of the last few years, the historical losses, but also because of fluctuations in oil prices or under other things. I think government really does have a place to help. Ultimately, aviation and transport is a critical infrastructure, right? Our society, our civilization is very much based on our ability to be globalized and to be able to travel, whether it's actually passengers, but also air freight. So I think everyone needs to get involved and understand a circumstance. I think investment in technology really can lead toward better efficiencies. And so while there might be an upfront cost to doing it, in the medium and long term, it'll actually help make sure that these airports and airlines are more efficient and actually generating better returns. And better returns mean they can keep reinvesting. And so I think that cycle is going to be important to kickstart. And that's where really government can also help. And again, I talk about areas like security and automation of security. You're absolutely right. An airport is a processing hub fundamentally. And where we can see congestion or where we can see a lot of confusion when passengers started to come back was actually, in the first instance, was around security and how slow that became. I think during COVID, I don't know whether airports, airlines, and governments never necessarily invested ahead of the curve to be ready for the rebound. And that's one of the reasons we're seeing the issues we're seeing now. It's because they're catching up.
I want to, you bring up two questions. One, does Elenium focus mainly on passengers, or do you also, because you talked about air freight, air cargo, are there technological security concerns that your company can address in the cargo area? And well, let's start there.
Sure. So, I mean, our primary business in the aviation sector really is around passengers. But at the same time, we also do work below the wing. We do have customers like Qantas Freight, where we provide the system that tracks all the air freight that goes through their network. And there we try to utilize the same type of self-service concepts to have a system that allows the people that put the freight onto the aircraft to try and automate that in terms of understanding where the freight needs to go next, when it needs to be decanted, how it needs to be broken down, etc., and trying to automate that process flow as much as possible. So yeah.
Okay. I had a little brain fog earlier. That's why I started with one question. I actually had two. And then we're going to take a break here in just a second. But I wanted to ask you about standards because everybody, when COVID came out, you saw the development of digital travel passes. IATA came up with one, and then I lost count at it was more than a dozen different companies had come out with various kinds of travel passes, but there was and some of them adhered to some of the standards that ICAO had talked about, that IATA had talked about. But the problem was these standards were never really adopted by governments around the world. You had health ministers making travel minister decisions and saying, no, we're going to shut the borders, or yeah, we can open the borders, but you have to have this pass or that pass. And it really, I think it really hurt the industry a lot. What kind of, do you see that in your business? Does Elenium do you have problems getting people to agree on a certain set of standards? Because when you're talking about technology and digital identities and things like that, there's got to be some standards that people adhere to.
Absolutely. Interoperability is really core to the aviation industry, right? So not just in terms of technology, but everything from aviation, airline operations, airport operations, all those type of things. I agree with you. During COVID, there was a lot of confusion, and I think that confusion in terms of, what travel pass do I need, what vaccine certificate do I need a PCR test, all those type of things, led to a lack of confidence in the traveling public for some time, right? Am I going to take a trip and am I going to get stuck at the border, or am I going to get stuck in a quarantine hotel? So I think that hurt a lot, and the industry, as well as governments here, need to learn from that. I think historically, aviation has been actually quite good at standards. If I think about self-service in particular, there are a number of standards which have been implemented by working groups as part of IATA, like the Common Use Self-Service Standards, that really make it much more easier for airlines to be able to invest into technology and understand that investment actually can be leveraged and utilized at the airport. Again, interoperability is key. In terms of biometrics, there's a lot of talk about the standards there's the One ID, etc. I think there is a bit of a case there of not everyone necessarily adopting the standards, and there being some firewalled kind of implementations, some standalone implementations, and they definitely seem to be geared toward airlines, or airlines particularly that have large domestic operations, where they're going, well, I'll do something in my own backyard. And I think that's actually because they're trying to get ahead of the curve. Talk about biometrics in aviation has been around for a while, but really where it's found adoption has been in immigration processing, and you don't really see biometrics yet being used in domestic travel. And yet I think there's actually a lot of value that can be derived from the use of biometrics in those type of situations. And so I think it'd be great for some of the standard bearers in our industry to get ahead of the curve, even more so on biometrics.
Every time we talk about biometrics, I go back to, and I just watched this movie again the other night, Minority Report, with Tom Cruise, where he's walking into a shopping mall and he gets his eye scanned all the time, and then he gets his eyes replaced, and they call him Mr. Yamaguchi or whatever. And it's always interesting to me when we talk about biometrics, about how far we're going to go with this technology. My poor dad, he's 80 something years old, and he just got his first smartphone about 6 months ago. And so it's been a real experience trying to get him to use WhatsApp to talk, because he's in the US and I'm here in Asia. So we try to talk all the time. But he doesn't. He hates technology. I don't think he's ever sent an email in his life. So it's kind of interesting. Aaron, we need to take a quick break right here to hear from our sponsor, Metrojet of Hong Kong. We'll be right back after this.
We're going to have the crown jewels of Asia, and I promise you we're going to have the nicest and busiest business aviation hangar in the region.
And we're back. We're talking to Elenium CEO Aaron Hornlimann. Stumbled over your name there a second. Sorry about that. Aaron, IATA and others have said traffic won't be back to normal until 2024. It's not really a technology question, but in a way it is, I guess. You couldn't tell that by the way people have stampeded back to the airport, getting on planes, whether it's Europe, whether it's even in Australia, New Zealand. I mean, they call it revenge travel, whatever you want to. I mean, people want to travel. They want to get out of the house. They want to go see grandma. They want to go see grandpa. They want to go to business conferences. They want to catch up with customers because, again, I mean, we could do this all day, online, Zoom, Teams, whatever.
What to say?
It's not the same. People still want to go to. I'm going to go back to Singapore in September for the MRO Asia show. I wrote a piece in the last issue of Asian Aviation about that. It seems like airports and airlines sort of failed to plan on this rebound. I mean, a lot of people were talking about it, and a lot of people were warning about it. And I think the figure from IATA was pre-pandemic there was 90-something million people employed in the aviation business, whether it's airlines, airports, whatever. And now that figure is down to something like 44 million. So basically half the people in the industry got laid off. Did the industry get it wrong on the rebound in travel, and was there a failure for them to plan?
So I think the industry got it wrong in terms of understanding how strong the rebound was going to be. But I don't think we can necessarily sit there and blame the industry, particularly airlines and airports, and saying that they didn't plan correctly. I mean, it wasn't a case of COVID was this kind of linear experience, right? I mean, we had multiple waves from an Australian context. We had multiple lockdowns. All of a sudden it was open, then it wasn't, and that could change week to week. And quite often it wasn't really clear what the government was going to do. And so I think governments help contribute to this, right, by not trying to give as stable as an environment as possible for airlines and airports to understand how they responded. Some areas where I think criticism can be leveled at some of the airline operators and airport operators. I think there was a moment in time during COVID that could actually have been used to upgrade in the infrastructure, both technology and other, in the airport while there was less passengers going through, right? I mean, what a great time to be able to have a transformational change when you didn't have this live operating environment, where it's actually quite often hard to change. But I could understand that kind of conflicting tension between, well, how do we save as much capital as possible while trying to use this as a opportunity. So I would have liked to see them use it as more of an opportunity than they did. But we are where we are now. I think what is going to be important is that the industry doesn't assume that now that COVID is not necessarily over, but we're learning to live with COVID, that we just assume things are going to go back to normal. I think the aviation industry needs to think about investing in what happens if there is another major disruption, whether that ends up being another health crisis, whether that ends up being more geopolitical issues, or whether that ends up being some sort of natural disasters. How do we learn from the last 2 years? If we don't learn from the last 2 years, then in some ways, I think then that's when you could level a lot of criticism, because all of a sudden they didn't use the opportunity when it was there, and then they didn't learn from the opportunity. I think that would be a massive failing of all of us.
Never let a crisis go to waste, I think, is the
right.
is the way people put it. And I can't remember who first said that. I don't know. I think it was a politician in Washington or something. Are there regional differences? I mean, and you talked about Australia, where the federal government was hamstrung a little bit, actually, because the federal government there, and I keep up with Australia because my publisher's based there, and I work with a lot of people there. But the federal government could say one thing, okay, we're going to open up whatever, and then Western Australia would say, no, hang on, we're not going to open our borders yet. And even within the different states, New South Wales would say, okay, we're open, but you can't go to Western Australia, you can't go to the New Territories, whatever. And so, there was even among the states, there were differences. But in Asia, for example, I mean, is Asia better prepared for the rebound? Are they, and sticking with the technology, and we'll follow up on that, but let me combine these two here. Changi in Singapore, actually, they shut down Terminal 4. They shut down another terminal that was going to be shut down anyway because they were going to renovate the whole thing. And Terminal 4, I've actually gone through in Singapore a couple of times, very technologically advanced. You barely deal with any people. Most of it is automated, whether it's bag screening, immigration, all those things. Is Asia better prepared for the rebound in travel, and do you see regional differences in the take-up of technology?
So I think yes, Asia is in a good place in some airports, right? I mean, Asia is obviously quite a vast area. Changi is a great example of one where they've obviously invested in technology and passenger experience. But there are then other airports within Asia that really are only now starting to look at self-service. You know, we have new customers in Vietnam. They're really starting from a greenfield space when they're looking at automation and technology. Regionally, I think one of the best regions that have handled this is actually the Middle East. Right, it's been quite interesting to see what they've done there. If you look at Qatar, I mean, they Doha almost did not shut down during the whole of COVID, and they kept really leaning forward. If we look at the results of Etihad Airways and the passenger volumes going up in Abu Dhabi, I actually think they're some of the gold standard in terms of the recovery. And I just flew back from Abu Dhabi, and I had a similar experience you just mentioned for Changi. I was able to, catch an international flight. I turned up to the airport 40 minutes before boarding. I didn't have to speak to or talk to anyone. Was able to go, through security straight to the boarding gate. It was really seamless. And to be honest, after hearing all this news around the congestion around the world and having a little bit of anxiety about that, I felt far more reassured knowing that it was so easy to travel like that again. It was almost as if COVID didn't really exist anymore, and yet they still had, the whole verified to fly process. It was quite easy to make sure that all my documents were ready well before I even turned up to the airport. So the airport, in terms of that idea of it being a central processor, was actually quite fluid.
Things have changed. I mean, you talked about documents to be ready to, verified to fly and all the documents and everything. I mean, it's amazing to me that still a lot of paper documents are required depending on where you're going and where you're coming from. My wife was traveling a few months ago, and we had, I probably killed 2 or 3 trees printing out all the documents that I had to get ready for. And then my son is taking a sort of his first trip by himself to the UK soon, and I had to print out his COVID vaccine certificate and all of that. So there's still, you can't just, it's a little bit frustrating, I think, for people like me and other travelers. You used to show up with a ticket and a passport and you're on the plane. But now you got to make sure that you're vaccinated and you got documents and this and that. It's crazy. Let's talk about your products very quickly. Again, you deal with biometrics, self-service, contactless processes. A couple of things. One, give us an idea of what's the hot seller for airports and processing. And is there do people today, it was really funny, I was watching TV the other night and there was a comedian on, female comedian, and she was talking about, data security and she was going to sign up for this app, but everybody was warning her about data security. And she said, there used to be a thing called the phone book, specifically the white pages that had your name, had your home address, your zip code, your phone number, and all of that. So, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, that you would get these phone books delivered to your house and you could look up, everyone on there. So is in your dealings with people, with airports and airlines, is data security a big deal for the consumer or more of a big deal for your customers?
I think both. So in terms of the trends we're seeing at airports, more and more we're seeing airlines and airports really talk about an end-to-end biometric-enabled journey. So that's all the way from the checking in at home, taking a selfie, being able to do that type of remote enrollment, all the way to even using biometrics in the car park connected to a digital wallet to take payments. Obviously, checking in, dropping off the bag, going through security lounge, and the boarding. More and more, we are seeing airports talk about that entire journey, and they're looking at it not necessarily as a big bang approach, but how do they provide infrastructure? How do the airports provide infrastructure as a platform for the airlines to be able to leverage over time? Because obviously an airport, the kind of time horizons they think about are in the decades, and yet technology is updating, almost by the minute. And so how do they provide something that's future-proof, that allows the airlines to adapt as technology gets better? So I think that's very much a trend we're seeing. In regards to data security and privacy, I really think that is important for both the industry as well as the traveling public. And I really do like that analogy you talk about with the white pages. Just remember, with the white pages, you could also opt to have a private number and address. So you had the option of not being in there. And I think that's the part that we really need to get right as an industry, making sure that the passenger has control of their information and they have the right to say whether they want to use this new seamless technology or actually they don't want to use it and they want to use more of the traditional processes. And yes, that might take a little bit longer for them to go through, but they've got that sense of control. I think ultimately, if you don't force it down their throats and they feel like they have the choice, people will realize that the automated option is actually more convenient, less anxiety inducing, it's much quicker, and they will choose to use it rather than saying, actually, you don't have a choice. And then all of a sudden people become a little bit conspiratorial around, well, what's happening with my data and where's it being stored and all that type of stuff. So it ultimately comes to choice and consent to solve those problems.
What do you do? And again, I always go back to my dad because he's not exactly a Luddite, but he's pretty close to the perfect definition of a Luddite. But what, how does someone that doesn't use a smartphone, doesn't want a smartphone, which there are a lot of people out there that say, I don't want one, I don't want Apple or whoever tracking me, I don't want this. How do you deal with passengers like that?
So I think two parts. Again, really, you still need to address. An airport has to be multimodal and multi-channel. You still need to allow an option for passengers that don't necessarily want to use technology to go through their journey. I don't think it wouldn't be right to ignore them. Really, if we think about airlines and airports, you need to worry about the vast array of demographics. And it's not just about people who don't want technology. It's around what about passengers with accessibility requirements, et cetera. You need to really think of everyone. In fact, it's not just about the 80-20 rule. Thinking of that 20% is actually quite important. I think technology with regard to digital identity and how that can actually make the whole process at airport more seamless will actually leapfrog the mobile phone. So, our vision is you actually shouldn't need a mobile phone to use digital identity and to use the technology at the airport. If you have to use the mobile phone through the entire journey, again, you do limit yourself to a cohort that are comfortable with a mobile phone device, but also now you're having to support all these different manufacturers, Apple versus Android versus whatever. So if you can actually have a passenger simply check in and take a selfie, whether that's on their mobile phone or on the kiosk at the airport, and then from that point their phone stays in their pocket and the entire journey doesn't require you to touch anything, whether it's a peripheral device or a primary device. I think that's the ultimate goal, and that also enables you to have options around, offering things in different languages, offering things in different ways that actually will support groups of passengers that typically haven't really been, serviced with technology and self-service through the airport.
Interesting. Aaron, I always like to end these shows on a bright spot. What's the bright spot that you're looking forward to as CEO of Elenium, and what do you think are the bright spots out there for the aviation industry?
Well, I think the fact that the recovery has happened quicker than I think a lot of people anticipated really is a bright spot. I think it's proven the fact that, as humans, we want to travel, we want to go see our grandparents, we want to go see our family. The fact that even business meetings, again, I was traveling in recent weeks, they are better in person, and you can create that personal connection than using video conferencing. Obviously, video conferencing is here to stay and has its place, but ultimately we're going to still want to travel. And I think that really is a bright spot. We just need to think about, as an industry, how do we adapt to that? And let's not be complacent and assume that a disruption like COVID can't happen again. And let's learn from it and make sure the next time we're in a better place. And I think they're really positive messages that we're seeing out there. And I think finally, if we aren't pessimistic about the future and we're positive about the future, ultimately it's going to be a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Aaron Hornlimann, CEO of Elenium in Australia, thanks for joining me in conversation.
Thank you very much for your time, Matt. See ya.